Hello, welcome. Today is Wednesday, April the 2nd, 2014. This is Paul Sandhu. I am posting here a show with Jim Willie, the Golden Jackass, that I recorded last Thursday on March the 27th. This show, I posted the first hour of it last week, and as many of the listeners pointed out, there were some serious audio problems with it. Jim is in Costa Rica, and he was in a remote place over there, and the connection was actually very weak. The show itself got interrupted several times, or disconnections. There were several disconnections, but we did manage to get through it, and I think it is a great program. So I have cleaned up this audio as best as I can, and I'm reposting the whole show now, including the second hour, which was not previously posted. Therefore, I would recommend that even those who have heard the first hour, that please listen to the whole program from the beginning. You will enjoy it a great deal more, and a lot of the information that might have been missed because of the audio problems the first time around, you will be able to listen to those with more clarity this time around. I must warn you that there are a couple of problems still where the audio fades out considerably. But thankfully, it's only maybe a total of 3 minutes or so over the course of the whole 2 hours that this problem occurs. Also note that, these programs, I just started doing them, and I understand that there are going to be some logistical problems which I'm trying to resolve, and your suggestions and recommendations are always welcomed. As, for example, some listeners have suggested that I should get myself a new unidirectional microphone, which I have ordered. So going forward, hopefully these audio problems will not reoccur. But in the meantime, I wanted to keep doing these because I think there is a lack of in-depth information regarding not just economic matters, but about all matters like political or spiritual or economic, financial, that concern us all, that we need to be aware of. And I myself found that there was a depth of reporting in these areas to a great deal, even in the alternative media. This is the reason why I said, I would go ahead and start, doing these programs myself, because I have studied this information for a long time, and I'm aware of a lot of people and friends with a lot of people, such as Jim Willie, who can educate us, including myself. So that was the purpose behind doing these programs. I understand that, these may not necessarily be broadcast quality like you would see on CNN. As a matter of fact, I wrote to CNN to see if they would set me up with a small studio and a sound engineer, but strangely enough, I haven't heard anything back. So in the meantime, I'm just a working step doing this by myself. So if there are some issues or problems, please bear with me. And also, give me your suggestions and ideas of how we can improve these going forward. So thank you for listening. Sit back and enjoy this program. And if you do, and you agree with this information that Jim is putting out, please share it with everybody you know. Thank you.
I am joined today by the man himself, the Golden Jackass, Mr. Jim Willie. To most of my listeners, Jim Willie needs no introduction. He has a doctorate in statistics, so I like to call him the Doc. The Doc is a financial analyst beyond compare, and along with thousands of others that follow his work, I am left astounded by the depth of his analysis that far exceeds the average sky is falling type of forecasting that dominates the alternative economic news world. Jim's website is goldenjackass.com that has a list of his correct forecasts going back a decade or more. Jim Willie is the editor of the Hat-Trick Letter that is available on his website, through subscription. Any person who wants to stay informed in these tumultuous economic times should subscribe to this letter. Jim has graciously agreed to come on today and share some of his recent analyses and forecasting with us. So without further delay, let me welcome the Golden Jackass, Mr. Jim Willie, to the program. Hello and welcome, Doc.
Oh, it's good to be back, Paul. It's been a while, not a long while, but isn't it amazing how quick events take place? We are in hyperspeed for global economic change through breakdown.
You are I would agree with you, and I'm looking forward to hearing what your analysis on that in depth. And I can say that since the last time we spoke, which was maybe 6 7 weeks ago, since that time, if that time the world was in second gear, now I think we are up to fifth or sixth gear. So let's begin by analyzing the topic du jour, which is Ukraine, or more precisely, the fast developing east west divide, with the West threatening sanctions against Russia, threatening to launch an economic war against it. And China is standing fast with Russia. So, my question is, how are Russia and China going to coordinate their financial response?
Well, I find it quite interesting that there's a lot of bluster and threatening going on in the Western press about how they're going to deeply cripple Russia. Since when does the debtor nation ever cripple the creditor nation? Since when? Nowhere in history. So what you're hearing is a lot of bull, a lot of nonsense, a lot of bluster, a lot of, I don't know, it's just posturing by arrogant airheads. They happen to be very aggressive people. They happen to have militaries at their disposal. But one of the weirdest facts that I've found regarding this really nasty movement going on in Ukraine is that the military efforts and the black ops and the Blackstone snipers and things like that, this is not U.S. military. This is the CIA military. There's a split. It's between Langley and the Pentagon. The Pentagon does not want any war. The Black Ops boys want to go in there and do what they do best, which is steal central bank gold, which is set up big energy contracts, and basically rape and pillage. So Russia and China are embarking on their own plan, and there's a lot more coordination than meets the eye. I noticed that during the Sochi Olympic Games, President Xi and President Putin had some photo ops. They were meeting. I think they met a lot more than we realize, and they were doing a lot of planning. They weren't talking about, the downhill skiing and ice hockey. They were talking about how they're going to coordinate their plans. But I've got a theory, and it's real simple, that Russia and China are going to coordinate their actions. Already China has said, we back the Russian movement in Crimea. The Western press is trying to distort the Chinese position. I won't go into that because it's such nonsense. But I believe, here's my theory, Russia is going to go straight to the petro-yuan as an intermediary. They've already said they see the yuan as a viable global banking reserve currency. All it really needs is a lot more debt securities, like yuan-based Chinese government bonds. You can't put yuan in banks so easily. You can't just put in cash, because cash doesn't earn interest, and it doesn't work that way anymore. So the Chinese are going to have to issue a lot more debt, which will seem like a weakening movement, but instead it's going to be like a colonization movement of Western banks. So many people are wondering, gee, is Russia going to do something like demand rubles for their oil and gas? Well, they could. They could go and demand gold, but that would be very disruptive. I think they're going to just say, pay us in Chinese yuan. Just pay us in the Chinese currency. And then you're going to have these stupid, dumbass Western analysts take back their words saying, where they used to say China's going to be isolated. You can't isolate a nation like Russia with 12 time zones. And once Russia and China are tied at the hip, the argument of isolation becomes stupid. So I think in the near future there's going to be a gold-backed yuan, like in the next 12 or 18 months. This close relationship between Russia and China, I think, will lead Russia to make a gold-backed ruble, but not before China makes a gold-backed yuan. When these gold-backed currencies come in, It's just going to be like a tidal wave knocking completely over and upside down and washing away the Western bond markets and their currency systems and their banks. There's a major linkage, though, that's coming with the Kremlin and Beijing. I wish Beijing had a one particular building, like we talk about, Downing Street for England, and White House for the U.S. and Kremlin for Russia, but Beijing doesn't really have one. But there's going to be a linkage between the Kremlin and Beijing, I think, with this yuan oil pricing. China is the #1 importing nation of crude oil. Therefore, when Russia comes out and says the yuan is good for making payments from European customers, the Chinese are going to do a parallel move and say, we're only going to pay for oil that's imported into China. We're only going to use yuan. If you don't like it, we'll find somebody else. And that's going to be the death of the petrodollar. I find it absolutely astounding when I talk with American visitors and tourists and people who live around Costa Rica. I talk to them. I say, well, what do you make of the threat to the petrodollar? I don't find a single person comprehending the question. They don't comprehend that the foundation of the U.S. dollar is oil-based sales done in dollar terms, like from Korea, like from Spain, like from Brazil. They pay in dollars. Americans don't understand their own currency and its global contract status. So after we get this gold-based yuan and maybe the gold-based ruble currencies, then we're going to get, additional punches in the gut with possibly, this is not for certain, but possibly, because once these are set up, the yuan and ruble in gold terms, it's going to be really easy for the Gulf nations, the Gulf co-op nations, Saudi Arabia and Kuwait and the others. They're going to come out with a Gulf dinar that's gold backed. And then wouldn't it be a slam to the European Union if the Germans and the Dutch come out with a Nordic euro? So the Chinese are going to adopt this petro yuan. And I think that they're not going to really distinguish it. If the Germans want to pay in rubles for LNG gas or anything like regular old crude oil shipments or coal shipments or aluminum shipments from Russia, it doesn't matter. Make it yuan, make it ruble, doesn't matter. And there's an interesting development that took place in the last 2 or 3 months that I'd like to cover as part of this answer. The Russians, with their Rosneft giant, which is twice the size of ExxonMobil, their big energy company Rosneft bought Morgan Stanley's Platts office. Platts is responsible for oil pricing and oil trading. So is Rosneft planning to take control of oil pricing from its New York office? This is not in the news. It's going to be important. Already, last week, Rosneft made a very interesting backdoor acquisition of the Italian tire company Pirelli when they bought a big stake in a conglomerate, and the conglomerate has ownership of Pirelli. This is the sort of thing that's going to happen. Russia is integrating itself with the European economy. And as a last hint regarding crude oil, notice in the last year or more, the Brent European crude oil price converged with the West Texas crude oil price, the $18 to $20 difference, give or take, that had been maintained for years, maybe at least 3 or 4 years. It went away. What does that mean? Well, my smartest guy on the London ground told me, that's Euro Raj, he said, Jim, what it means is the end of the petrodollar is coming. You cannot have the end of the petrodollar suddenly with the U.S. price having a $15 or $20 differential from the European price. So the European price is eventually going to control the pricing mechanisms, and then Russia is going to control it. Wow. These are major, major transition changes And all the while, these European, Russian, Chinese entities, especially the BRIC nations, they're going to start diversifying out of the treasury bond, because when the petro yuan comes in, the petrodollar is going to go out. Japan is not going to need their treasury bonds to buy crude oil. France will not need treasury bonds to buy crude oil. All these nations are going to get rid of their treasury bonds, and what a problem that's going to cause. Unbelievable things kept happening here.
If the Western Europe, for example, and the Asian countries, they start, getting a lot of their, they already are getting a lot of their energy from Russia anyway. So once they do start pricing it and paying for it in currencies other than the dollar, then would they also not to sort of align themselves politically with the Eastern Bloc? So then that means that the U.S. influence that exists at the present time in Western Europe, that would really have to wane at the same time, would it not?
Yes, it will. And what it's going to do is cause some intense problems, because for the last 15 years, the main force holding together the dollar has been the U.S. military. We've been sending out fraudulent bonds since 2000. And what's the consequence? Well, nothing, because the U.S. has a military. So when countries like South Korea in 2005 announced they're going to have a big diversification out of the dollars, the U.S. Navy conducted exercises off the Seoul Korean coast. This is how we've been supporting the dollar, with threats. Iran back up. Iraq started selling crude oil in euro terms and accumulating euros. The next thing you know, we accuse them of weapons of mass destruction, but all the chemical weapons were purchased from Bush family organizations, from the U.S. military. They did find the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. That was a lie in the news. They did find it. They all had U.S. markings, so they didn't tell the truth on that. So all these nations are pressured into staying within the U.S. dollar fold. I call it the King Dollar's court. They stay in the King Dollar's court from pressure and threats. So the European nations are going to have a real dilemma soon. Which do you want? Economic vitality, or staying within the King Dollar's court with armed guards? And I think what's going to happen is, we saw a preview in Syria where the British just backed off in their support for the Americans. And the Americans looked really weak and really bad. So I think the same thing is going to come, Dash. It's going to be the Europeans saying, hey, look, we support the American efforts, but we're going to back off here. We wish you all the best. We're going to give you psychological support, but we're not going to give you the manpower support. We're not going to give you the financial support. And the U.S. is going to find itself stranded in Ukraine.
So what you're saying, Jim, then is that if these currencies like the gold-backed dinar or the Nordic euro do come about, then they will come about because these countries, they will have the confidence that they are not going to be threatened by the might of the U.S. military anymore, because they will have protection from Russia and China, in a manner of speaking.
Exactly. And the second thing is, they are motivated to come up with a different currency because they realize the dollar and the treasury bond are both toxic. So their banking systems are insolvent and dead. Let's just go back to the human body. If you've got a cancerous, let's say, liver, you got to treat it or else it spreads. If you've got an insolvent banking system, it doesn't stay intact. It doesn't stay static. It doesn't stay removed from the economy. It spreads the cancer to the whole body economic. So these European nations, these Asian nations, and even Latin American nations, they're going to want to come up with a new financial currency system because they've got contaminated blood with the dollar. And they got insolvent banking systems spreading capital cancer. This QE, this bond monetization, they call it stimulus. Well, it's now economists are starting to wake up. I've been trumpeting this message for 12 to 18 months. It spreads capital destruction. And it's real simple. When the QE prints up money and buys bonds, what they do is they force the whole world to lift up the price of all the commodities. So you got the cost structure rising, you got profitable enterprises suffering, the profit margins disappear, and you have businesses shut down because they can't be profitable anymore. When the businesses shut down, they turn off their machines, they liquidate some of the equipment, they close down the businesses and their offices. It's called capital retirement or capital destruction. That's the indirect result of all this QE, and these nations across the world realize it. And remember, when the Fed announced QE in early 2012, they said it would be temporary. Now it's being seen as permanent. That's the biggest change that I've seen regarding perceptions regarding the Fed. And everybody is starting to understand. Taper talk failed. QE is forever.
So the American public at large does not see this, but the foreigners who have to live with this, with the Fed, really destroying their economies, they are fed up with it, and therefore this system is a natural evolution that has to come about. And all the Fed policies over the last 2-3 years, they have really hastened the process. This is the reason why the yuan is becoming a major currency and soon to be another reserve currency in the world. So how are these two superpowers, Russia and China, going to coordinate their commercial response, Jim, to what is going on right now?
Okay, we covered the financial response, but the commercial response is going to be just as powerful. I think we saw a really interesting prototype, as I call it. The U.S. put on sanctions against Iran. They got Europe and Britain to go along with it. A lot of pressure on a lot of banks across the Western world. Well, what came out of all that? Iran came up with a prototype, a workaround, and it was basically the trade between Iran and India paid for. The oil and gas that Iran shipped to India was paid for by Turkish gold. The Turks acted as an intermediary. I call it the prototype for gold trade settlement. It was a natural response out of need. It was an expedient. This is the sort of thing that's going to be happening now. Russia's soon going to announce a planned reduction in natural gas delivery to its Western European clients, its customers. I'm talking like France, Italy, and Germany. And what are they going to do? They're going to say, we're getting attacked, so we're going to attack you back. No, they're going to say something much more intelligent. The Russians are going to say, due to risk factors, we cannot be assured that in the current climate that these customers will properly pay in a timely fashion for products sent to your country, the gas, the oil. So for risk factors, they're going to cut back on deliveries. They've already given some clues in that particular type of language. I think they're also going to see the Russians say something. They're calling it the Holy Grail deal. But the Russians are going to say, we're going to make some long-term commitments to China because they're a more reliable client, and we're building some advanced pipelines, and we just see a tighter commercial relationship emerging than the hostile one that's ongoing and deteriorating in Europe. When Russia announces that the 2015 gas deliveries are going to be diverted to China, Europe's going to go into a freaking panic. They're going to say to the Americans, just like they did regarding Syria, we don't want to cut off our relationship with Russia. We'd rather cut it off with the Americans.
Unless they can find another source of gas supplies, which is unlikely, is it not?
Well, I don't think Finland's going to supply. I don't think the Arctic Circle. Hi there.
Okay, Jim, I think we lost you, but you were talking about.
Oh, I know where I was.
Okay, go right ahead then.
Took a note. You ready? Let me know when you're ready.
I'm ready. Yep.
Okay. The Europeans will have to come to grips with the threat of lost gas supply. It could be crude oil as well. We're talking about 30% roughly, 25, 35%, 20 to, I'm sorry, 25 to 30% of European gas and oil supply coming from Russia. If Russia makes a promise in 2015 to redirect a lot of flow to China, Europe's going to go into a panic. But there are two sources of gas that Europe can appeal to. One is Qatar in the Persian Gulf, but I don't think they have the capacity for that, the infrastructure. The other one is Iran, and I seem to remember that the Europeans got interrupted by U.S. military actions in Syria. So the Europeans are feeling like, our alliance with the Americans is not good for our commercial health. The Iranian gas, by the way, Iran has 30% of the global gas reserves. That's an astonishing proportion of world reserves for gas. Iran is building a pipeline through northeastern Iraq and into Syria, and the United States is in the way. So that would supply Europe, except the Americans are in the way. And now the Europeans are realizing that their gas supply from Russia is possibly under threat because the Americans are getting in the way. The double impact is gone. Instead, just the single giant impact is there with an impact to industry. I really wonder, people who make those comments, those shallow comments about the winter being gone, do they realize that steel mills use gas? Do they realize that car factories use gas? Do they realize that almost all industry uses gas? No, these are the U.S. pressures basically are going to cause a real big treasury bond dump. It's going to bring about the birth of new barter systems, and I think going to cause a lot of pressure to create a new dollar just for U.S. domestic purposes. This annexation of Ukraine is going to backfire, and it's going to collapse rapidly. In fact, the trade zone that the U.S. is trying to set up with the Europeans right now, it's going to look like a Mickey Mouse venture. It's not going to gain any traction. And the Europeans are going to realize, well, what value is a trade zone with the United States if Russia cuts us off on our energy supply? The U.S. cannot make up for that energy supply loss. These are tremendous disruptions coming. Only if the Europeans continue with their deep American alliance.
Well, it seems like to me that the Americans are busy shooting themselves in the foot, and I wonder if there is some sort of method to the madness. But regardless, what you're saying, that it is ticking off a lot of countries around the world, and they're once one of the major ones begins to dump these U.S. treasuries, then I think it could become a cascade with the whole world following suit very shortly thereafter.
I don't think it's method to madness in a constructive way. It's a method to madness in a destructive way that is really the U.S. not shooting itself in the foot. It's shooting itself in the face, shooting itself in the chest, and shooting itself in the testicles.
And okay, I mean, then the method is that it is being the result is that it is going to the U.S. as an economy and as a world power is going to definitely be greatly diminished, if not become inconsequential sometime in the future. How long that'll take, we don't know, but that seems to be a natural consequence of all these things that are going on. So, Jim, what other nations do you think will play a key supporting role with Russia and China in this dispute, if you can call it that?
Three nations: Germany, Saudi Arabia, and Iran. The Germans are really in a weird, awkward position, sitting on the fence. They're taking the U.S. dollar and the North American trade, and I think they're realizing this doesn't have any future. This does not have a way out. We're getting stuck. Our banks are dead. Our Deutsche Bank is ruined. We don't have a way out. We don't have a future. We don't have a way of preventing the cancer in our banking system and in our currency and in our bonds from spreading across and wrecking the entire economy. The Germans suffered their first deficits. I'm sorry, not deficits, trade deficits in quite a while. I think the Germans are going to adopt the ruble and yuan with Eastern trade. They're going to say, we're willing to accommodate the Russian oil and gas imports. If the Kremlin wants yuan, we'll pay in yuan. If they want ruble, they'll pay in ruble. No problem. Whatever you want, Putin. That's what's coming. The Germans are going to not curry favor. They're going to shake hands with the Russians. Already there is a tremendous number of railroads, heavy rail. We're not talking about passenger rail. We're talking about heavy rail for moving coal cars and iron ore and all kinds of cement and whatever, lumber. It's coming from Russia and it ends in Germany. These are not, temporary infrastructure developments. These are long-term investments. So another thing about the ruble, if Germany decides, hey, we would find it convenient to pay in rubles for Russian oil and gas, that will be an instant grenade thrown in London and Wall Street's financial district because they're tinkering and tampering and sabotaging the Russian ruble right now. So wouldn't it be ironic if the Germans wreck the London interference and the Wall Street interference with the Russian ruble currency? Later, I think you're going to see full ruble and yuan usage by Germany, and they're going to realize that the dollar is wrecked, and it's going to cause some rather extreme forces for the dollar to split. We'll get into that in a moment, I hope, but the Germans, by embracing Russia and China for trade and for financial deals, this even goes further. This is London. London had an announcement today that they don't want to jeopardize their financial trade with China. I'm talking about Chinese government bonds and corporate bonds being launched and issued in London. So, is London going to back the U.S. efforts in Ukraine and risk their Chinese financial contributions in the great city of London? I don't think so. Okay, the other big country is Saudi Arabia. And I got a nice way of summarizing it. I wrote this down. Saudi Arabia is going to kiss Russia's ass, hide under China's skirt, and court the new Gulf protector. The Saudis and the Americans are on the outs. This is over the Muslim Brotherhood. This is over a lot of different things. Soon the Saudis are going to announce acceptance of any major currency for oil sales.
Oh, really? That's huge, Jim. When you say soon, like, do you have any time frame on that, or do you mean?
Yeah, sometime after tomorrow.
Okay, really? Okay.
And sometime before 2015 is well along. It could be 2 months, it could be 6 months, and it could be right after a major Russian and Chinese pair of announcements. Remember, the Saudis are not strong. The Saudis are just wealthy. The Saudis are not brave. They hide under their protector's wing. The Saudis are not honest. They pillage their national wealth, and they go about appropriating big businesses all across Saudi Arabia under the threat of tax investigations and violations. It's called appropriation, and it's a very nasty thing that they do. But the Saudis, I think, are going to be as the important leader. They're going to bring about, I think, the disintegration of OPEC itself. They're going to make a statement like this: we accept for our oil all currencies, the dollar, the euro, the pound, the Swiss franc, the Japanese yen, the Chinese yuan, even the Brazilian real. We accept them all, including the dollar. That way they look like they're not abandoning the dollar. It looks like they're just accommodating a bad situation. And remember, their number one export destination out of Saudi Arabia is China. So they want to avoid looking like the China yuan coolie. They're going to try to look like they're strong and responsible managing a business. But in time, the OPEC organization, I think, is going to fade out with less importance. And then comes the wild card of Iran. Iran is critical as a Gulf nation, Persian Gulf nation, in being integrated with China and Russia. They're already a big Chinese partner. China's got all kinds of investments in Iran for oil and gas, petrochemical, etc. So what's going to come, I believe, is something that's going to really piss off and disappoint the Americans. It's that Iran and Saudi Arabia are bringing about some agreements, some formal agreements, some peace talks, some commercial ties, some accords on the way they do business and not interfere with each other. They're going to bring about a détente, and the person who's going to stand in the middle to make sure it happens will be China, because China is being invited right now to become the Gulf region protector. The new protectorate is going to be in China. It's no longer going to be the United States, and that is a major development to crush the petrodollar. The noose around the petrodollar, Paul, is going to be Gazprom and the vast network of pipelines that include Iran. We're going to see the birth of the natural gas co-op, and we're going to see the OPEC fade into the history books. And with it will go the dollar. And with it will come tremendous pressures for the Americans to create their own private third world dollar.
Okay, well, can't say that I disagree with you there, Jim. I understand that Saudi Arabia is China is already Saudi Arabia's largest trading partner, and the Crown Prince was just down in Beijing signing all kinds of agreements with them, with the Chinese. Putin is heading in May to China, and I think they're gonna make some big announcements down there, which will go a long ways into elevating the status of the yuan. And like you said, London is already setting itself up as a clearing bank for the yuan. So it looks like to me that London is just about ready to stab New York in the back. I guess there's no honor among thieves. So these things are definitely playing out even as we speak, and they are gathering speed. It's like an avalanche coming down the mountain, and it may be right at the top, but it doesn't take very long for it to reach the bottom, and that's what we are going to see this year, I think. So then what will be the effect of all these things to U.S. Treasury bonds? I guess that's the $64 trillion question.
Yes, it is. What I think is happening is the U.S. is trying to prompt and provoke a military action and response from Russia, and it's not working. The Russians are just holding their ground. They realize that missiles are pointed at them. They've got missiles pointed back at the Americans. It's a standoff. When you have two superpowers standing off against each other, you get an impasse. You don't get a war. I mean, I hear all this talk about, oh, war is inevitable. Yeah, right. Yeah, just like the Iran war, right? Was that an Iran war in 2004? Another Iran war in 2005, and another Iran war in 2006, and another Iran war in 2007, all the way up to another Iran war in 2012. Yeah, right. Why was there no Iran war with the United States or Israel? Easy, because behind Iran was China and Russia. So the U.S. and the West, let's just call it Western Europe, the U.S., the British, and Western Europe, faced off with Iran, backed by China and Russia, and there was no war. What are you left with? The vulnerability financially by the United States and their tremendous commercial import requirements versus Russia and China, which have the opposite. U.S. loses. U.S. backs down. Their partners in Europe and Britain will back down. The United States is going to find its treasury bonds dumped, disposed of diversified out of, and trashed. The U.S. Fed is going to be forced to gobble up all the different volume coming from various different nations. Notice that there was news out, obviously not in the U.S. Goebbels press, the propaganda networks. The financial networks in the United States forgot to mention or failed to mention that a cool $100 billion worth of Treasury bonds was dumped by global creditors around the world in a 30-day period that ended in roughly March 17th. 100 billion in 1 month. The Fed was forced to gobble it up. In fact, they created a Treasury bond rally during that dumping exercise to draw attention away from the fact that maybe 30 different nations, led by Russia and China, were dumping Treasury bonds. Where does the Fed get assistance? Well, the Department of Treasury and J.P. Morgan, which runs the chief investment office. And in Wall Street, there's a little bank that used to be pretty powerful, but not so powerful anymore. It's Morgan Stanley. They're like the chief whore and bottle washer for interest rate derivatives. Back in the second half of 2010, they issued a cool $8.5 trillion worth of interest rate derivatives. And it led to a Treasury bond rally when nobody in the world was buying Treasury bonds, but everybody in the U.S. financial press was talking about a huge rally in Treasury bonds. So there was a fabricated rally using interest rate derivatives. So what's going to be the outwash of all this is the U.S. Department of Treasury is going to be forced to finance its own debt. The Fed is going to be in a real breakdown mode soon where they cannot handle the volume. And if they do handle the volume, their whole propaganda message of tapering down QE is going to be revealed as a gigantic lie. Most of what they say is a gigantic lie. But, you know, when they talk about taper and then they're discovered tripling their bond monetization with QE, it's going to be embarrassing. And besides, attention has already begun to be focused on Belgium, that little broken nation, the headquarters of the European Commission, European Union Commission. Little Belgium that couldn't get its budget passed in 2011 and 12, that is not running any surpluses. They've suddenly found it possible to accumulate $200 billion in Treasury bonds. So that's obviously the Draghi European Central Bank acting as a partner for the Fed, accumulating Treasury bonds. Oh, this is so sickening. The only solution for the U.S. government is going to be to launch its own, what I call Scheisse dollar. Let's just call it a shit dollar. The split Scheisse dollar is going to be launched because the U.S. will have to manage and finance its own debt, and they have no ability to do so during this financial strike led by China and Russia, and during this commercial isolation that the United States is going to find itself in when Europeans cut off. So the U.S. government is going to have to finance its own debt, and that's why we saw in the State of the Union address in, I think it was January, where the puppet Obama, I think they call him the president, yeah, puppet Obama, I'm sorry, the President Obama announced that he's going to seize government pension funds, the TSP, the Treasury Thrift Plan, Savings Plan, the Treasury Savings Plan, TSP. All right, that's going to be the prototype for the government seizing pension funds. It's going to happen step by step. Next will be the 401ks, and followed by the IRAs. But they basically want to fund as much of the government debt as they can by force, by threat of fine, imprisonment, shutdown of your business, or whatever. The government will possibly, in the course of 3 or 4 steps in pension seizures, they will possibly be able to finance about $200 to $400 billion of the $1 trillion deficit. The foreign pressures are going to be enormous because the foreign nations right now have dollars and treasury bonds sitting in their banking systems, and they're being debased. They're the object of this QE, which is basically Weimar hypermonetary inflation. They're seeing that there's a bubble value to their treasury bonds because interest rates are near zero and they're artificially low even for the 10-year. You can't have a 10-year at 2.5% to 3% when you've got trillion-dollar unfunded deficits. So this is a situation that cannot continue and will not. But watch for a wild card here with China gradually taking control. It's already started with the International Monetary Fund. They've been the biggest contributor since 2012, and as a result, they're starting to call the shots, and now they've got an ultimatum for the U.S. government. They're telling the IMF that we will not continue under the present voting rights scheme, where the United States has, I think it's something like 50-something%, enough to veto anything. They're about ready to cut out the United States from the IMF because the Congress will not approve the funds for the IMF. This is untenable. This is ridiculous. Also, J.P. Morgan, I think, just got bought by China. So are we soon going to see China with maybe IMF oversight or partnership take control of the international dollar when the U.S. government comes out with its own domestic shit dollar? Let's call it the shice dollar in advanced mature circles, but let's face it, the jackass is not advanced, nor am I subject to niceties. This is going to be a shit dollar and it's going to be devaluated to hell and back.
Okay, Jim. Now, here's my question in regards to all this that you're saying. I agree with you that this is the natural outcome of all this. But where is China is concerned, does China and the U.S., do they not have like a symbiotic relationship where China's manufacturing is so much dependent on all the products that are being shipped to the United States? What will it do to China if this market is suddenly greatly reduced, by 10, 20, 30, 40% with the shice dollar, where, they will not be able to afford to import all these, cheap goodies from China anymore because they will no longer be so cheap anymore. So it wouldn't be in China's interest to really squeeze the dollar too hard, would it?
No, but I think the important relationship is to watch is the Russia-U.S. trade relationship. There is a good deal of Smirnoff vodka. There might even be an ample amount of Russian caviar, but the United States really doesn't get much oil. We got some Lukoil gas stations partnering with Walmart, various different locations across the United States. But the important thing to realize is that U.S.-Russian trade might come to a halt. That's not very important. In and of itself, it's not very important. China is then going to watch all this horror taking place and say, look, we're going to step in the middle here and we're going to be the diplomat. The new global diplomat is going to be China. They're going to step in and say, look, let's make some peace. We don't want a fast dump of the dollar. We don't want a fast divestiture of banking reserves with treasury bonds. And besides, Russia's down to only $120 billion worth of treasury bonds, when we, China, we got 1.3 trillion. That's $1,300 billion worth of treasury bonds. So the one at risk will be China. Therefore, China will step in as the intermediary and become the hero in a diplomatic gesture. So then you're going to see China work with the United States on payment systems. And I think what they're going to do with the United States is to say the dollar's in turmoil. We really don't know what its future is. So we're going to need the U.S. to pay for all of its finished product imports from China in yuan. And here's a really flash news item. It's looking like June of this year, June 2014, the Chinese are going to announce full convertibility of their yuan currency. If that takes place, you've got a timetable for the United States to convert to Chinese yuan to pay for their imports. So there's your answer. It's going to be an unusual flow of events, though, because the full convertibility will take place only in the trade zones of China, predominantly in Shanghai, where investment bankers of the West are not permitted entry. So we're going to have a lot of events coming in the next several months, but I believe that the U.S. is going to be one of the main agents and factors for lifting the Chinese yuan into a global currency and lifting its value by 30% pretty quickly. Now, let's flip that around. As the Chinese yuan goes up 30%, the US dollar goes down 30% versus it. As the Chinese currency becomes more of an international player, the US dollar is going to fall versus that rising star. Or is it a dragon?
I guess this is the reason why they have the London is busy setting up all these yuan swap facilities and the banks to handle this potential trade of the yuan that's coming down the pike, because they know that this full convertibility is beginning in June, and I read in Bloomberg today that it'll be within 2-3 years it'll become freely and fully convertible, and the Chinese are also busy removing all their capital controls, etc., that will be necessary, and I imagine they're going to start issuing a lot more of the yuan bonds real soon.
Well, let me correct you there. You said that you saw in the Bloomberg News today, in the next 2 or 3 years, full convertibility of the yuan. I just said it's going to happen this June.
No, I mean like on a worldwide basis.
Well, the worldwide basis is going to use the Chinese free trade zone. If the free trade zone has full convertibility of the yuan, the whole world is going to use it. So you're not going to have 2 to 3 years. Bloomberg is behind the curve in the news. The jackass has the current news. It's going to be June.
So the breaking news comes from the jackass, and Bloomberg is reporting is obviously once again behind the times, and that is of course you are always ahead of the curve there, Jim, and that's why we love talking to you. So now, what pressures will be put upon the new Shice dollar right out of the gate?
Before I get to let me finish this other point. You were wondering. You stated that London has this yuan swap facility. So does France. So does Switzerland. So does Frankfurt, Germany, with the EC, European Central Bank. All right. So they're going to be able to continue in trade with the Chinese. In fact, they'll be able to continue trading with the Russians if the Russians require yuan payment. So you see the importance of these yuan swap facilities for European trade with Russia by means of these swaps. Okay, the United States does not have that.
But then wouldn't they be forced to have one sooner or later in New York as well?
I believe they're going to have one in Toronto.
Ah, okay.
So U.S. might conduct its Chinese trade payments through Vancouver and Toronto, and swap facilities that the Canadians provide, because the Americans are too full of fascism, arrogance, and aggression. They're not going to. Okay, all right, enough. I could go on for an hour about this bad attitude. This is basically National Socialist fascists who think ball, and they will not play ball. When are you going to see a New York City or a Los Angeles big bank swap facility with the yuan? It's more likely to come from Wells Fargo in San Francisco than it is New York City. Anyway, Shice dollar out of the gate. What pressures are going to be on? Well, they're going to be unbelievably powerful pressures, acute pressures that force change quickly. I'm talking about a pressure. If they, let's just say tomorrow, the United States announces a new public dollar. I prefer calling it a Shice dollar. Call it whatever you want. The new dollar, the new split dollar, the new republic dollar, the domestic dollar currency. Well, what's the immediate pressure? What's it worth? What's it worth? What's the valuation? And I think it's going to be a 33% devaluation versus the U.S. dollar, which is soon going to be called the international dollar. They want the name U.S. off it because they don't have any control over it, and the Federal Reserve is not going to have any more monetary control over it. So the correct valuation to achieve equilibrium is going to be an instant, impossible task. It's going to require devaluation, but they cannot say, well, we're going to do right out of the gate a 50 or 60% devaluation. No, they can't. They can't cause a 100% import price increase for everything brought into the United States economy. No, what they're going to do is they're going to try to make it small, and by doing so, they will not achieve equilibrium. They can't be too large for the shock. They can't be too small because they won't achieve equilibrium. It's going to cause disruption, and it's going to lead to a second devaluation, just like in Venezuela. There's your example, Venezuela. They had a 43% devaluation, followed by 38, followed by 37. Anyway, it was a total of about 73% in the space of around 5 months that Venezuelan bolivar suffered. And look what's happening now. Okay, it cannot be too small. It cannot be too large. It just can't be anything to achieve equilibrium. I think if they wanted instant equilibrium, they would do an 80% devaluation of the republic dollar. But that would cause, what would that be? It'd be about a 300% price inflation on imports. You can't do that, but that would achieve equilibrium. You can't have equilibrium if you have disruption. So in other words, you cannot achieve equilibrium. The United States is in desperate need of attracting foreign capital for two purposes. One is to finance its debt. There's no foreign contributions anymore except maybe Belgium and Japan. The Japanese are realizing that their Japanese government bonds are pretty well broken, so they're diversifying into some treasury bonds because they're broken. The second thing that the United States needs is attracting capital to reindustrialize. When the United States goes on a reindustrialization campaign, it's going to be pretty clear that the United States is in the third world.
Now, I read somewhere, Jim, or somebody was talking about it, that the roles are going to be reversed, where the Nike shoes are going to be made in New York, and it'll be the Chinese that'll be buying it. Does that sound about right to you?
Well, the Chinese will be managing the shops where Americans will be working gladly for twice the minimum wage and no fringe benefits, but they might get help with Obamacare. This is going to become a joke. This is going to become a tragedy and a joke. But when the new dollar comes out, the Republic Shice dollar, it's going to have to be devaluated heavily because no one will want it. All right, so the United States is going to have a nearly impossible task. They must attract foreign capital to reindustrialize. They must attract foreign capital to finance their government deficit. But it's going to be extremely difficult. And when the United States goes about and talks about reindustrializing, it's going to be quite clear that the United States is in the third world. They're going to be loaded with debt, loaded with currency problems, lacking industry, very aggressive military, dead banking system, and corruption all through their banks that control the government. So the third world is going to be a rather shocking admission and conclusion for the rest of the world to make. Watch Venezuela, because Venezuela had two different separate currency devaluations, separated by about, I think, 4 or 5 months. The total of the two devaluations was about 73%. 73%. And now look what's going on in the country. Supply shortages, price inflation, chaos, marching in the streets. And when they're marching in the streets, they're not working. So the economy's really disrupted there. The United States is not going to be able to avoid the shock of creating a second currency, because the shock is going to be, first of all, just foreign nations holding U.S. dollars and treasury bonds suddenly saying to themselves, wait a minute, what about what I'm holding in my hand? What's it worth? What about my existing contracts with suppliers? What are they worth? Are they valid? So the U.S. is going to have a tremendous shock. They can't make the devaluation too small because it won't find equilibrium. They can't make it too large or else it'll cause big disruptions. They're going to have to do it by steps. They're not going to admit how many steps there are. So it's going to be full of confusion, full of doubts, full of a lot of worry. And then you get the big problems with the suppliers and the investors. This is going to be very ugly. Well, immediately they're going to wonder from the systemic shock. They're going to watch the disorder, the violence. I point to the three areas: supermarkets for food, gas stations for gasoline and diesel, and ATM machines for cash. They're going to see on the news that there's violence at all three. There are holdups at the ATMs. There are empty ATMs. There's vandalism of the empty ATMs. There's going to be explosions at gas stations. They're going to go up in flames where they're visible for 5 miles. The supermarkets are going to get ransacked in the middle of the night. Foreigners are going to watch this. It's going to be very difficult for the U.S. press not to report it, so they're going to put a best face on it. There is no best face on it. The foreign suppliers are going to be frozen. They're going to fear more devaluations in a follow-up. So they're going to be hesitant to make contracts if the devaluation, the next one, is only going to be 3 or 6 months away. The foreign investors are going to be frozen. They're not going to want to invest in Miami or Manhattan property. They're not going to want to invest in California real estate. If suddenly there's another 20% devaluation in a few months, they're going to say, wait and see. The frozen nature of foreign investors and suppliers is going to be catastrophic. Domestic producers are going to be tempted to attract foreign payments and thus avoid the U.S. dollar risk. This is going to work backwards. I mean, you're going to have Walmart saying, hey, wait a minute, let's make these contracts in yuan. The Chinese are making 70% of what we sell anyway. Let's make the contracts in the yuan, and suddenly you have the making of a solution. But the trouble, even with a Walmart supply contract in yuan, is that when you start selling the shirts and the electronics and the clothing and the other things, the shoes made in China, it's going to have to be priced in the new dollar. So you're going to have some sticker shock. What was selling for $22, that nice shirt, well, 3 months from now, it's going to be $30. 3 months later, it's going to be $38. The price inflation is going to be astonishing. Now, notice that we've had for the last 15 to 20 years reports from the government of very minimal price inflation. There's going to be some catch up there. There are other factors involved. The commercial paper is called, well, you know, it's got a lot of names, but commercial paper is the lubrication for financing between corporations, a supplier and a seller, a vendor. Just think of, it's always good to go back to the Walmart model. Walmart has got a lot of commercial paper that finances their what do you call it? Their lubrication system, their intermediary finance systems, their 30-day financing. They don't use Visa. They use commercial paper. They don't use MasterCard. They use bought and sold what used to be mortgage bonds, because they could hold a mortgage bond and make more interest than they did on a treasury bond. But that's all kind of dried up. This is going to become a nightmare for supply. There.
Okay, I lost you there. So, anyways, I'm glad that you're back. So you were talking about Walmart, you know, and the stickers. Please keep continuing.
Walmart's unusual. They've got a very efficient inventory replenishment system. They have something that relies not so much on commercial paper as I described a minute ago, other companies have commercial paper, like Home Depot and Sears and Kmart. They rely a lot for secondary financing for 30 days, 90 days to manage all their letters of credit and all that other work, all that other financing work. But Walmart has a very efficient just-in-time inventory that it revolves around their cash flow. So they're very advanced, but their sophistication in finance for inventory replenishment is also their Achilles heel. They're going to see empty shelves because their cash flow is going to start being hurt, and it's going to amplify for their inventory replenishment. Other companies that have more established commercial paper for 30-day and 90-day financing, they're going to do better than Walmart. So Walmart is going to be your big success story of the past turn into the nightmare story of empty shelves in the present. It's going to be very difficult to understand. And I'm going to have some major challenges, but what I'm trying to lay out is the severe price inflation from the new Scheist dollar, the split republic dollar, but it's going to apply only for imports. There's a good rule of thumb. Half the United States supply is from import in their economy. Half of what is bought and sold is not made in America. So if you've got just a rough figure of 50% increase in the import prices, figure a 25% system-wide price inflation shock for the U.S. economy. That's what's likely going to come in a first round. Something like 15 to 25% price inflation systemically for the United States economy. And then more later.
It seems like to me that is not just the U.S. Of course, the pain in the U.S. will be the most severe, but ultimately, even China will have to go through some severe pain because all that manufacturing capacity that they have built up, it is the U.S. is not going to be able to absorb as much of it, so they're going to have to do some restructuring themselves until they find other markets, maybe in Asia or Latin America or somewhere to essentially replace what they are currently supplying to the U.S. So I think this could be a system-wide, shock, not just to the United States, but of course the U.S. is going to be the one that'll hurt the most.
Yes, but it's going to give rise, Paul, to the Eurasian trade zone. I got some news just yesterday from a fellow. He's not a client, he's just a contact, but an important contact. He's fluent in Japanese. He's living in Tokyo for the last 20 years. He's an American. When we speak, it's in English with, regular old American accent. I was surprised that he was fluent in Japanese, but he said, Jim, I've been living here for 20 years. I'm reading the journals, and we see some developments right now in the Japanese economy that's accommodating the Russians. The Russians have 100 different petroleum-type engineers in Japan without visas. This is the essence of what trade zone is all about. It's loose borders. It's low customs. It's easy movement from one nation to the next if they are the engineers and the merchants. So when China loses their customers from the United States, they're not going to lose them entirely. But when you've got the price of shirts going from $20 to $28 to $36 in two quick steps following devaluations of the new republic dollar in Walmart, you're going to see the Chinese look for other clients, and they're going to find them in Korea, Japan, Indonesia, Singapore, Vietnam, and Russia. They're going to expand the Eurasian trade zone. So as the China-U.S. trade slips, as the China-Western Europe trade slips, watch an increase in Chinese trade within the new and fast-growing Eurasian trade zone, which I think is going to involve a whole lot more of these Western European nations than the United States expects. And I'll give you an example. The Russians just bought an interest, a very important interest in Pirelli tires. All right, well, fine. China has been buying up Portuguese, Greek, and Spanish and Italian treasury bonds, sovereign bonds, for the last 2 years. Okay, fine. Now you're going to see a lot of efforts by Russia and China where they say to Spain, for instance, pull your troops out of Ukraine and Eastern Europe and join the Eurasian trade zone. They're going to tell the French, back off on your U.S., your deep, long-standing, CIA-related support of the United States. Back off. Let the world know that you no longer support these subterranean, devious Ukrainian initiatives. And France, join the Eurasian trade zone. Belgium, why don't you just kick out these clownish parliamentary pedophiles in the European Union and join the Eurasian trade zone. Italy, we'll offer you some help. We'll continue your gas flow from our pipelines where you've got a significant 23% dependence on Gazprom. We'll add some more. We'll get the Chinese to convert some of their treasury bonds into Italian sovereign debt. We'll offer you support, but do so and you can join the Eurasian trade zone. These are the things that are going to happen. The Western Europeans are going to first be threatened with cutoff of oil and gas, and second, they're going to be encouraged. First the stick, then the carrot. The carrot's going to be financial support and deeper trade to join the Eurasian trade zone. There are two nations that are going to struggle like hell to be part of the Eurasian trade zone, and that's Britain and the United States. I don't think the United States is going to be invited for at least 3 years.
So now, the China, what you're saying, and I agree with you that the way China has been doing this has been a lot smarter. Back in the late 70s and early 80s, when Japan became the second largest economy in the world, they had that opportunity as well when the yen became fully convertible. But they didn't take advantage of it, or for whatever reasons, they did not do the things that China has busy been doing, setting up all these bilateral and multilateral agreements, involving money and trade and such, to position itself to become an economic powerhouse and maybe even a banker to the world. One of the things that has been happening, I believe, behind the scenes is, of course, the barter system, because I think the whole world is fed up of this trade based on one currency, the US dollar, or maybe even a couple of them, maybe the euro, but mostly the dollar. And what they are looking behind the scenes, of course, is this system of barter. What do you have to say about this barter system?
Let me make a little rejoinder comment regarding Japan quickly. Japan had two big disadvantages when they went fully convertible for their yen currency. The first is that the Bank of Japan is basically a U.S. banking system outpost. Bank of Japan has been following the U.S. policy for a long time. In fact, back in 1991, when their stock market went bust and they had some major threats to their own banks, the U.S. helped them along by saying, why don't you just go to 0% and we can bring about the yen carry trade, borrow the 0% money out of Wall Street, 0% money offered by the Bank of Japan, and invest them in treasury bonds. So essentially, with your 0%, you can help the United States finance its debt. And Wall Street can make a carry trade profit and make, hundreds of billions of dollars year in, year out. And the U.S. did something extremely nasty. They hired the Yakuza, which is a Japanese mafia. They hired the Yakuza to occasionally kill a Japanese banker to keep them in line. The second big disadvantage the Japanese had was that the U.S. had military bases like in Okinawa. So if the United States basically controlled their central bank, and occupied some of their northern islands, how is Japan supposed to go about an independent state and develop in their own best interest? No, they develop in the best American interest. All right, so you asked about barter. This is a very big, complex. Let's try to keep it simple. It's going to be weird. It's going to be complex in its hot poker aspect for dollar-based trade. It's going to be a hot poker as far as banking SWIFT systems. It's going to be very involved, but very simple. It's going to be simplistic in its structure, but complex in its impact. But a sophisticated barter exchange system will complete the picture of this new global trade network. We're going to have the Eurasian trade zone. We're going to have the petro-yuan. We're going to have Russian demanding various types of payments for European customers for energy sale. You're going to have the Saudis joining in. The Iranians are going to be integrated finally. And as they are, the Americans are going to be pushed aside. American hostility is just going to be recognized for what it is. But the barter system is going to cut out the banking system of its toxic elements.
Hooray!
Pardon me?
I said hooray.
Well, this is what's necessary. If you don't have a gold-backed currency or gold-backed trade settlement on a net basis, you're going to need something instead that's far more clever, like barter. In barter, let's just say that I love the Chinese-Bolivia example. Neither one's in the U.S. network. Even though Bolivia is in the Americas, it's not in the U.S. network. So all the industrial metal, the copper, the tin, aluminum, iron, silver, that Bolivia sends to China has a corresponding return voyage of finished electronics and televisions and soon a lot more cars. All right, well, if it's a net zero, well, you don't really need a settlement system. What you need is a banking swap system that handles the 30-day and 90-day lubrication for letters of credit, and just the 30-day, 90-day short-term credit to manage the time of shipment between contract and delivery. Okay, well, if you don't have a net difference between the bilateral trade in two nations, you don't need a complex net settlement system. You need a simple barter system with banks that manage the short-term credit requirements, the short-term credit facilities. One company says we need 40 days to deliver that, and here's the payment. It's all temporary. And another company says, well, we got something in reverse. It's offset by 5 days. It's not exactly the same. Well, that's what the yuan swap facility manages between two countries. And, I got news for you. The Chinese yuan swap facilities is a list of 30 nations that includes England, France, Germany, Switzerland, and Australia, and New Zealand. The United States had better wake up, or it's going to be isolated in the third world. So the bankers are going to lose power when this system comes in with lightning speed. It's going to come in and fill a vacuum. A lot of people think, oh, gee, you disrupt these economies, everything's going to turn to hell, and everyone's going to turn to war. No, the vacuum's going to be filled with the new yuan-based system and the barter system. The Eurasian trade zone is going to spring up to become a structural barter system. The free trade zones in China, basically Shanghai, but there might be another one in a province that adjoins Hong Kong, they're going to spring up. And they're going to be basing their trade on both barter and yuan settlement, Chinese currency settlement. The imbalances are going to be eliminated very quickly because the transactions are going to be quick. It's going to be all right. You got X and Y; they're almost the same. All right, let's balance it off and carry the differential into the next transaction, and it'll all work out. But the barter exchange system is going to have its own different accounting system, and it's called Bartor. This is not in the news. It's in the hat trick letter. I've got this straight from the voice because not only is he a gold trader and broker, he's an international consultant to help nations react to crises and develop economies in new and innovative ways and build certain sectors of their economy, like trade and banking and even mining functions. This barter system is going to take the world by storm. It's not getting much of any press right now, but the trading partners are going to set out and find their own exchange values by transactions. They might say, look, we've got an imbalance here, but we'll offer you a quick discount. Can you promise us a discount this summer? And it's going to build up trust. It's going to be self-regulating. It's going to be free from the manipulation of paper currencies. It's going to be free from the involvement and the little strangleholds, the choke points of banks with all the SWIFT rules. So the United States and British bankers don't like this because it's not going to be involving the banks, it's not going to be involving the currencies, and not going to be therefore involving their control nor their credit. All the positions will have counterpositions in place. And you can have multiple parties involved. I keep mentioning Bolivia and China, but suppose Bolivia teams up with Brazil to work with China. And any imbalance that they've got that's carried over, well, maybe Brazil works out a deal, a three-way deal with Bolivia for metal, for their iron, for Brazilian steelworks. Okay, well, before you know it, you got 7 countries involved, and you've got some statistics optimization routines coming in that balance out. Okay, we got 7 countries involved. We got these 86 transactions. Let's see if we can get an optimization routine working for a 90-day period. Okay, poof, we've got it working, but we're going to have to exclude this one country. It'll work perfectly with these 8. Well, that's how it's going to work, optimization routines, and a lot of demand for statistical consultant services, which I really like. I'm very good at optimization routines. All right, so all these counterpositions, they're going to create the invitation of other parties in order to fix minor short-term imbalances. Oh, wow, it's going to be really fun. It's going to be exciting. It's going to be like a breath of fresh air. But it's going to come from the Eastern Hemisphere. It's going to come and form the Eurasian trade zone. Now, what are the drawbacks going to be of this Bartor system? Deadbeat nations who like to boast that they export their debt and bonds are going to be excluded. They will not qualify. A treasury bond, even a new republic U.S. government bond, is not going to qualify unless somehow they manage to make it valid and qualified short-term commercial paper, which I highly doubt, since another devaluation is going to come in 3 to 6 months. So deadbeat nations that export their debt and make up in the past, it used to be that the United States had a big trade deficit, but a smaller current account deficit because we exported treasury bonds and mortgage bonds and had foreigners buy property, like in Miami, New York, Los Angeles. Okay, well, those days are fast fading away. The deadbeat nations of the world, the ones who have these huge trade deficits, they're going to have to fix themselves with some reindustrialization in order to qualify to join the community of nations in the barter system.
Very interesting, very interesting. So what you're saying is that these bankers are the middlemen, and this barter system is going to cut these guys out. So the cancer will be cut out, and and trade and commercial activity can proceed in an orderly fashion and in a fair system, which is the way it should be done.
I believe so, but this is going to take a while, and it seems like the United States has got a death wish. My joke, it's not funny, but why would the creditor nation tolerate the debtor nation in the United States and Western Europe? Why would they tolerate these debtors poking a stick in the Russian bear's face? They're not going to tolerate it. So the Russians and Chinese are going to bring about some changes, and I think all along the way do a very creditable job in diplomacy, in identifying the United States as the hostile party, and in working in constructive solutions to avoid war and to avoid empty shelves across the world. Because no one wants disruption to supply. No one wants social chaos. I'm sorry.
Maybe somebody might want that, though, Jim.
No, I'm correcting myself. You're right. I think the U.S. government wants specifically that. I think the Langley forces want specifically that, because this Arab Spring is one of their hatched initiatives. And I've come to learn from Cato, who's my other really good second source. I got 3 or 4 really good sources. Nobody matches The Voice in quality of information, timeliness, but Cato has some U.S. government, military, and security agency contacts, and he said to me over Christmas, he said, Jim, do you know this Arab Spring, it's got only one big purpose: cause enough disruption so that the Bush family and all their black ops boys like Blackstone, so the Bush family can go in there and steal the central bank gold. And that's what they did in Libya. That was easy. They didn't even have to move it. It was all sitting in London. That's what they did in Tunisia. That's what they were doing in Syria. Some gold was moved out in Syria, but I've got a suspicion, and The Voice would not confirm this, nor could Cato. But remember, the Russians said that we were shipping out a bunch of the chemical weapons from Syria? I think they were shipping out central bank gold. I think the Syrian central bank gold, a lot of it is sitting in the Kremlin vaults. And I could not get a confirmation of that. And I have a firm suspicion that he just did not want to confirm. So I'll make the story that the Russians are holding it without confirmation.
Well, some of these things have to be speculative in nature, because it is almost impossible to get firm confirmation. But if it's reasoned speculation, then you can run with it.
I can run with it, but look at it this way: the Voice or other parties that want to confirm are not in a position to confirm. They might have a position involved where they would suddenly lose their contract if I went out and said The Voice confirmed it. Instead, The Voice did not confirm it, and I'm speculating it, and I'm pretty damn sure that that's the case. I believe side by side, the Russian ships moved chemical weapons and gold bullion from Syria. And you have to wonder, that, therefore, did the Syrian gold become radiated? So we might have the first case of Goldfinger. I don't know.
Anything is possible, Jim. Anything, we laugh about it, but anything is possible in this crazy nutbar world that we live in.
Well, if we can have radiated fish in California, I suppose we can have radiated Syrian gold bullion. Now, this is not laughing matter, but what's coming, I believe, in the next 6 to 12 months, and maybe a lot sooner, is an outbreak of capitalism and a squelching and suppression of U.S. and British-led fascism. I've made a harsh criticism of the American economic community in the last couple of or 3 years, that they have forgotten what capitalism is. Capitalism is not borrowing money off your home equity and going out and spending it on a boat, or spending it on education, or spending it on jewelry, or spending it on just a joyride with a new car. That is not capitalism. That is the opposite. It's burning your capital, eating your capital. We're going to see an outbreak of capitalism where the United States becomes reindustrialized. I've been on a mission the last several months to learn the locations of Chinese industrial parks. These are special trade zones where the Chinese are permitted to invest a huge amount of their money. They're bringing in treasury bonds, not altering the balance of the dollar and the yuan exchange rate, starting up a couple of Idaho-based industrial parks, connecting it with railroad lines and highways. They're making a couple of California-based industrial parks. They bought up, I think the name of it is Sullivan, New York. It's upstate New York. They've got a couple of other ones in New York. They're buying property in Philadelphia. I think it's old Rust Belt industry, idle factories. They just bought up a Westinghouse plant in my old hometown of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. They're interested, they're conducting talks now to buy a lot more of the idle Three Rivers different manufacturing steel factories. It's the Ohio River, Monongahela River, and the Allegheny River. But the Allegheny River comes from upstate New York, western New York, and that's where the water supply comes from for western Pennsylvania. It's beautiful, excellent water from western New York, the Allegheny Mountains. All right, so the United States, for the Pittsburgh area, developed the Ohio River. That's where all the quarterbacks come from. Unitas, Blanda, Namath, Montana. They're all from the Ohio River. The other one is that Miami Dolphin, what's his name? Marino, Dan Marino. He came from my high school. So he's not from the Ohio River gang. He's from Central City, Pittsburgh. But the point is that China is going in and buying up idle manufacturing. And by doing so, they're going to have what I regard to be coming up is a 3-year retooling plan. You can't go in and buy, say, a Monongahela River retired U.S. steel plant that's been idle for 22 years and bring it up to speed in 2 months. Manufacturing sites, steel sites, whatever. And instantly having the challenge of bringing them online. They're going to have tremendous challenges that are not going to be solved in a few weeks or a couple months. They're going to need 2 years of retooling, remodeling, restructuring these plants, and organizing port facilities, and organizing the suppliers. So they're going to use a lot of American labor. It's going to be Chinese management. It's going to be, I think, a considerable amount, but not exclusive, American suppliers. It's going to be some state-of-the-art Chinese equipment, and basically the obsolete and behind-the-times Americans are going to be reindustrialized. And this is how the United States economy is going to come back to life.
So would you say then that the U.S. Becomes like a Chinese colony in principle, if not in openly?
Well, remember back in the 70s and 80s and 90s, the Japanese became an important trade partner to the United States. But the United States pretty much controlled the island with military presence, and they controlled their central bank. Now I think the reverse is going to happen. The United States is going to become an important industrial partner to China to expand their economy, to build up their middle class. But the Chinese are going to have an extraordinary amount of control over the U.S. banking system. And if the United States says, well, we're going to need to devaluate the currency by 10%, the Chinese might order them to wait another 2 months. So the orders would come from Beijing. As for the military, I don't have a good answer for that, but I believe what the Voice described to me back in 2009 might take place for the United States. I asked him, what happened to the Nazi war machine? What happened to the German industrial military complex? What happened to the Nazi Germany 6 or 7 major corporations? And he said it became the Odessa Corporation. It became an independent, very powerful arms builder and vendor. And that's what I think is going to happen to the U.S. military-industrial complex. They're not going to want to get stuck in the third world of the United States. They're going to want to expand their global reach, continue it, not get stuck with this republic shit dollar, and keep their client base going and try to foment as many wars, pardon me, as many wars as they can. Do what the Nazis do best. Create war, destabilize, destroy, help the bankers to own the lands, and repeat what the Odessa Corporation did. That's what I think is coming, and I wouldn't be the least bit surprised in the next couple of years if the Chinese announce, as part of a very big trade pact, that they're going to put on some troops on the ground and take one particular military base in the United States, and they're going to use the argument that it'll be for keeping peace in Venezuela and Mexico.
Where would they put the troops on the ground?
I don't know. Maybe close to the Mexican border.
Aren't they already down there? I've heard many people say that they're already down there.
I don't really know. I suspect that they are. Here's a funny little story regarding Panama. I went down there, several times, and a couple times I went and saw the canal. It costs only $7, and for an extra fee, you can see their wonderful museum, 4 floors there. I only saw it once, but it was tremendous. But when I saw the canal and visited and just watched the ships and watched the full cycles of water coming in, the ship entering, water going out, the ship lowers, and then the ship leaves. It's a fascinating thing to watch. It's an old canal, but it's 100% run by the Chinese. Well, I didn't see a single Chinese face. Where are they? The Chinese can have a very significant presence. They are masters at not being seen. In Costa Rica, I've been told that there are something like 20,000 Chinese in Greater San Jose. But I do these funny little experiments of walking through a mall. I walk from one end to the other on the ground floor, planta baja they call it, which means lower plant, lower floor. Then I go to the first floor, go from end to end. Then I go to the second floor, end to end. Third floor, end to end. Then I go down the staircase. I just count the Chinese faces. Usually I count only 3 or 4. 3 or 4 years ago, I counted none. And I've been told that they're all over the place. But I don't see them. Then I go walking in the Chinese barrio. They actually have that regular old mini pagoda thing that's an entry with 2 big posts and a little Chinese roof thing over. I don't even know what the name of it is called, but they've got one in San Jose, and it's got a name right on it, planted. It's Barrio Chino, which means a Chinese neighborhood, Chinese district. And I walk in there and I look for Chinese faces. I don't see it. They're buying the buildings and keeping the current managers in place. They're buying the hotel and keeping the current managers and staff in place. They're masters at being invisible. The Americans are the opposite. They come in, they buy the place, they strut around, they put on some American signs in English, and they strut their stuff, they show their power. The Chinese are going to show their strength with the emergence of banks. And in San Jose, there's a very big struggle going on. There's only one Chinese bank in all San Jose Metro. It's called Cathay, C-A-T-H-A-Y. Cathay, they call it Cathay. There's an application for a banking license for Bank of China. Bank of China is all over Panama City. They got probably 20 branches in Panama City. They got 0 in San Jose, Costa Rica. I think the Costa Rican authorities are a little bit reluctant to let the Chinese banks in because all the Chinese projects will appeal to the Bank of China, but they already seek external financing because the Cathay Bank is too small to manage any of the larger Chinese projects, like say building a 30-story tower where 2/3 of the units are residential condos and the bottom 1/3 are business and business suites and the bottom floors are retail joints. Banco Cathay, I mean, I once talked with a bank manager when I joined a friend. I said, let me come with you. That was a few years ago. So I did, and the guy was trilingual, English, Spanish, Chinese, and he said he's from Taiwan. Nice guy. And I said, is it true that the Chinese projects cannot be financed by your bank? And he said, yes, we're always struggling to provide them the adequate funds, and sometimes we have to go and seek a partner for the funding. So we're as much funding as we are facilitating. But he said, I can guarantee you in a few years there'll be other Chinese banks here. And I said, but that's competition for you. And he said, that's okay. It'll build the economy, and it'll be good for everybody. That's the Costa Rican lesson that I hope gets absorbed. Expansion is good for everybody, but the big blocking factor in Costa Rica, this is kind of unfortunate. The blocking factor, I really need to close. I'm losing my voice, and I don't like sounding like a high-pitched woman. The big blocking factor in the Costa Rican development of Chinese influx is electricity. Their capacity in Costa Rica is not sufficient to handle those 2 more, let's just call them packaging plants. They can't handle the electricity. They can't handle that marginal increase because Costa Rica likes to have maintained, I think it's 65 or 70% hydroelectric supply. And they've got a remarkably steady and constant rainy season. Very early May. It usually comes in late March and mid-April. When it arrives, it means it's going to rain every stinking day for 7 months. But usually just the afternoon.
Oh, you should move down here, Jim. We get snows for every stinking day for 4 months.
I'm thinking about moving to Chile.
Oh, Chile is a dangerous place. Northern Chile is being hit by earthquakes all over the place. I don't know if I want to go down to Chile.
Big deal. I had a 7.3 that I experienced in January 2009, and I'm not making this up. My chandelier in my office hangs down it used to, where I used to live there. My chandelier hung down around 3 feet, 1 meter. And during this earthquake in January 2009, it was swinging back and forth. I'm not making this up. About 1 meter side by side. It was a 30 or 40 second earthquake. And there are a lot of funny little stories that I have that are not fit for public discourse. I mean, people ran out. An earthquake comes, they run out into the street. They don't care if they're not wearing any clothes. They run out into the street.
Well, you don't have time to put on any clothes, I guess.
Well, if they're doing something that doesn't require clothes, they don't waste time to put them on. They want to get the hell out of the house.
Right.
That's the poor person response. I should say that's a response from residents from the poor barrios because their walls are not with steel reinforcement. Their walls cave in and people die. So I'm not living in the cheaper barrio. I was living in Vargas Araja, which is a nice neighborhood. I was living in a townhouse. So I watched, I'm kind of funny. I was counting.
Did you run out or no?
Pardon me?
Did you run out?
No, I stayed inside. She left. She was gone. She was holding a shirt. It was hilarious. I was counting how many seconds. I was looking at my walls to see if a crack would develop. Well, she was more scared that the whole wall would cave in. All right, it was pretty funny. But I've since experienced another 20 earthquakes. It's almost funny. Um, there was an earthquake 3 or 4 days ago. I don't think it was more than 1.0, and it only lasted a couple seconds. It's all over. 2 weeks before that, my desk moved. It wasn't more than a 1.0, maybe 1.2. My desk moved for a couple seconds. I called a friend and said, did you feel that? No, didn't feel that. So maybe it was in my area, but not his. Some buildings in San Jose are built on these gigantic springs to soften the blow of the shaking. No, Costa Rica is experienced with these earthquakes. Well, the funniest thing I've got to say regarding earthquakes is not girls running out in the street without their clothes on. It was a road. A couple times I was traveling between San Jose and a beach area called Jaco Beach, and I noticed that there was a kind of a weird hairpin turn where it went down like 10 or 15 feet, and then it rejoined over there, and then later it was paved, and I asked my friend, what is that all about? And he said, well, an earthquake about 6 years ago moved the road 20 meters. Yeah. And it sunk it down, had a little, sinkhole. So they had to fortify it, let time pass, let the rains hit it for a couple of years. They don't repair road damage from earthquakes right away. They let the rains work on it for a couple of years. That settles the ground. And then they go in there later and pave it. So now, every time I make that certain trip, you go more quickly, but you got to come down to 20 miles an hour to make that funny little big elongated S turn. All right, so that's my little pair of funny stories regarding earthquakes. They don't worry me one bit. I don't care if Chile has earthquakes. I might go there. I don't know. Who knows? I don't care. I just want to have my office, my freedom, and my internet.
Yeah, well, Chile is a beautiful place, so I'm sure you know it's more it's a bigger place than Costa Rica and more developed, I would imagine. Would be nice to go down there one of these days. But just to confirm a couple of things and do a little recap here. I was in the Bahamas, and you're right about the same thing. There's a whole lot of Chinese investment down there, way more than what I saw. Not way more, I would say 100% more than what I had seen there when I was there in 2000. So in the last few years, they are just basically investing money all through the entire world, from Latin America to the Caribbean to Africa to Asia. So that tells us that China really indeed has become quite the economic superpower. Now, to recap what you said, Jim, is that you don't anticipate that there is going to be what's going on in the Ukraine, which is where we began this program, that there's going to be any kind of shooting war, and that what essentially is taking place is a readjustment or realignment of the powerhouses of the world, and that does not mean that the United States is essentially going to disappear. But there is certainly it is in a transitional phase, and it is going to be painful for the people that live within the United States. But at the same time, it has some positive, that it is going to be reindustrialized, and the rebuilding of the infrastructure, etc., that is necessary is going to take place, even if it is going to be financed by the Chinese and maybe some other foreign investors.
Yes, I think that's a good recap, Paul. And I would add to that that the employment picture for Americans is going to improve markedly as a result. What is not going to improve is fringe benefits like what we became accustomed to in the 80s and 90s. I remember my insurance to be fully covered, pension contribution fully covered, and sick days fully covered, workman's compensation fully covered, and all that. Well, obviously with contributions out of the payroll deductions. Don't expect it to be anywhere near as generous when the Chinese employers come to town. But look for 20 applicants for every position. That's going to be the ugly rub. And, we're not going to see very educated people on the streets much longer. Not when the Chinese come and help to reindustrialize. They're using these industrial parks, I've come to learn, as the experimental grounds. They're going to be copied as models. And what I ask is, what about export tariffs? What about export taxes? What about property tax? What do they call it? Levy? Not. I'm lost for the word here, but there's a break that is given to a company for property taxes allowances, property tax allowances and forbearances and things like that. They're going to be part of the deals. Like China's going to say, all right, we're going to take that idle plant that's 20 miles south of California, and we're going to hire 6,000 people, but we're going to need a break on the property tax. We're going to need a break on the export taxes. We want it to be declared a free trade zone. So what China's doing in Shanghai, the Chinese are also going to do in the U.S. The Chinese are not going to war with the United States while they're commercializing and building up trade. The Chinese are going to step in as the new global mediator between the U.S. and Russians and tell the Europeans, look, wake up, get rid of your American partner and join the Eurasian trade zone. Get rid of this prospect of belligerence and war and join the Eurasian trade zone. We can bring you prosperity, rebuild your banks. We will help you to divest your treasury bonds and convert it to gold. We will be a full-service consulting organization for the reindustrialization and renovation of Europe, and they're going to do the same thing in the United States, but later. Because the United States is too proud and too corrupt.
Well, some would consider that whenever it happens to be poetic justice because all through the 20th century, anyhow, the Americans have had a pretty free ride, especially after the war when the dollar became the reserve currency of the world and through Bretton Woods and then the petrodollar. So, everybody's has been living high off the hog, so to speak. So that free ride is definitely coming to an end and it's visible to pundits like yourself, even if it is not to the average person. And like I said, some people around the world would perhaps consider that to be some sort of poetic justice.
Well, it would be. I don't like punitive measures. What I would prefer is that the bankers should be thrown in prison. I don't want the whole nation to be punished because they don't have the ability to see or the ability to clean the bankers and their corruption. I don't want to see the whole nation sent to the third world. I think the United States might avoid the third world and get shoved back to the second world. And very few people, I've asked a lot of people, it's pretty clear what the third world is, African nations and
Right.
nations with no visible banking industry or middle class. But what's the second? The communist bloc of East Germany, Poland, uh, Romania, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia. That was the second world. It was definitely suppressed and disadvantaged, but nothing like African nations. The United States, I think, is going to become new Poland, new Romania in sections. That's what I think is coming.
Okay, on that note, Jim, it's been a pleasure. I guess we could continue talking for another couple of hours, but you have done a lot of talking today, and I think you need to give your voice a rest. And we will, I'm sure, next time we do a program like this, a lot more will have happened because things are moving indeed at a fast speed now. What you have told us today, it is, I'm really happy because it gives us a clear picture because there's a lot of doom and gloom out there, which has some place in reality, but perhaps they don't see the whole picture, and therefore it's good to clear that up. Now, what you see is a reasoned outcome. It may not exactly shape up like that because there are some, psychos out there who control a lot of power and who have the ability to push some buttons which may alter the course of events very drastically, but we hope that that will not come to that. So I would really like to thank you for taking the time, and I will look forward to speaking with you again in the near future. And I always enjoy our correspondence that you keep me informed, for which I am thankful, as I'm sure will all the listeners be. Now, before you go, would you like to please tell listeners about your website and your hat trick letter that you're the editor of, and how they can subscribe to it?
Sure. Okay, I'm the editor of the Hat Trick Letter. It's a paid newsletter. It's found on goldenjackass.com news website. And believe it or not, this is the 10th anniversary.
Well, congratulations on that, by the way, Jim.
120 months. Unbelievable. And 2/3 of that has happened while living in Costa Rica. So it's very exciting, and I get tired at times. I get a little exhausted. Sometimes some friends of mine, especially my gal, would say, "Jim, are you okay?" And I'd say, "I'm mentally exhausted. I just need to relax and don't expect, intense conversation, because debo conversar en español. No puedo. No tengo la luz para conversar en inglés solamente con mi novia." Okay, I don't have the luxury of speaking in English when I'm tired. I have to speak in Spanish with my gal. So it's difficult, but on the website is a public page, and I think many people will find it very interesting and helpful and useful. It contains a lot of links for public articles, which are shameless promotional pieces to gain new subscribers. It's 2,500 subscribers. I'm back almost to my peak that I saw in early 2010. Many of my competitors are dead and gone. One is actually dead. It's too bad, but one of my colleagues had a heart attack a couple of years ago, and he died. His newsletter is radically altered, and not sure what its status is. But most of my competitors have lost 70% of their subscription base. I'm gathering in some of theirs because they were way too focused on mining stocks. I told all my clients in early 2008, mining stocks are not the way to go. They're going to get crushed. They're going to get bought up for pennies by the big corrupt companies like Barrick and some of the better quality large companies like Newmont. They're going to be bought for pennies. You're not going to make money on them. Buy gold and silver coins and bars. Store them in vaults like gold money outside the country. And don't worry about the corrupt price that's posted. Ignore it. Ignore it. Anyway, you find a lot of free information, free articles, free interviews on the main webpage, main5html. But the newsletter itself has two parts. It's the Money War Report with high-level things, high-level events, and the Golden Currency Report with low-level events, low-level dealings. It doesn't mean unimportant, just means, ground level. So the two newsletters are each posted every month. So I just finished last Sunday the March Golden Currency Report, and the previous Sunday the March Money War Report. They were a little longer than usual because there's so many damned events going on. This Ukraine, I must report on it. So the reports are long, and I tell people, treat it like a magazine. Just skip over a chapter if it really doesn't interest you. If you don't care about reading in the Gold Currency Report about the U.S. economy and its deteriorating condition, and you're well aware and you've read other things, well, don't read it. Cut out those 11 pages. So they're longish reports. They're comprehensive. They got a lot of links to actual articles for doing your own research. I don't just claim, well, this is what's going on, this is what I think. What I tend to do is I report on a story, then I report on its implications, and then I might attach a forecast what you might expect. So it's not an aggregation of current news stories. That's easy. That's lazy. I don't do that. I provide a lot of added value, I believe, and so do my clients based on the feedback. I get a lot of positive feedback, and it's nice to have another interview with you, Paul. We have some fun, and we get to some pretty important, meaty topics, and oh, it's always interesting. This is the most fun job I've ever had in my life.
Yeah, I can. I'm glad that you have fun doing what you do, Jim, and at the same time, it is very informative, and it makes us, like I said, brings us out of the matrix into the real world, and that's always a good thing. At least in my opinion, it is. Well, I guess we shall say bye for now, and hopefully in another few weeks we'll do another program and present some more good information that is not just valuable. I think is invaluable, because understanding what's coming down the road can help us prepare better for it. And therefore, Jim, Doc, it's been a pleasure. You have a wonderful day out there. Enjoy the mountains and the sun and the green grass, while I'm looking out at this frozen tundra here. And I'll talk to you soon.
Well, I'll try real hard not to get sunburned from this mid-80s heat. It's kind of intense, but I'll suffer.
Yeah, suffer, my friend.
All right. Good to be on. Thanks for everything.